If I had quit smoking when I started trying to quit smoking, I would have quit 15 years earlier than I actually did. I guess I'll never be able to calculate what I lost in terms of health or money by trying instead of doing. Likewise, thinking about doing something is often an excuse to let fear stop you from achieving what you hope for. Nobody's ever been proud of how much time they wasted thinking instead of doing. When I decided I wanted to escape from my options living in America and see if I could find a better or at least different life abroad, I did it in steps. Looking back, I wish I'd been more decisive about it. I could have saved a lot of money by not holding on to things that no longer gave me pleasure. Houses, belongings, entanglements. There are obvious steps that need to be taken before you just drop everything and run across the world. These steps mostly involve tying up loose ends and getting rid of excess. Somebody once took pictures of families and their possessions. They asked families in different parts of the world to take everything out of their house and put it in front of their house to be photographed. In Japan, the contents stretched for 50 feet. In Africa, it filled the doorway to the hut. In America, it took the entire front yard and the neighbors' yards on both sides of the house. From the expressions on the faces of the people who lived in those houses, I didn't get the impression the Americans were much happier than the Africans. There's a wonderful movie called Babies, which documents the first year of life of several babies in different parts of the world. No narration, you just watch and figure out what's happening. A lot of times you watch babies who can't walk yet. Sounds boring, but it's not. What's most interesting is the people who care for those babies and their circumstances. Again, more doesn't seem to mean better. So if you need to start somewhere, getting rid of stuff would make a good first step. Sell everything you can and you'll never rue that action. House, car, boat, furniture, clothes, appliances. They got more of that stuff all over the world. Most of it was made in China anyway. For some of us, it boils down to retire cheaply or spend the rest of your life worrying about money. Imagine the relief you'd feel after a life of economic struggle if you could only realize and believe that the problem has already been solved. All you have to do is choose which desirable place in which to live, in which of the many countries where the cost of living is dramatically lower than what you've been accustomed to. Not only is such a move possible, but it's relatively easy. You simply have to make a decision and act on it. Burn your bridges. Start over. There are parts of the world you've never heard of which are actually quite nice. I have a friend who just moved to Budapest. He can't say enough about it. Think Central America, South America, Southeast Asia. You won't be alone or lonely. Hundreds of thousands of expats have already gone before you. You can even hook up with locals and watch your life unfold anew. Well, cost of living is a lot of it, but other issues that matter a lot are personal safety and access to health care and the quality of food. Do you like the food? Because you may be eating it for longer than you think. I just spent 3 weeks in my former home, the San Francisco Bay Area, where the average rent for an apartment is $3,000 a month. My little house in Maerim, Thailand cost me $110 a month. That's why I decided to retire here rather than there. I have family and friends who are not as constrained as I am by economic considerations, and when they vacation, well, they prefer the scenic coasts of Italy. They don't need to consider retiring abroad because they're doing just fine where they are in the first world. I'm happy for them, but I'm also happy for me because my lack of foresight, and by the way, remember to start saving for retirement early, allowed me to join the enormous batch of economic refugees that have swarmed across the planet since the dawn of time. Oh, I could berate myself for having messed up the grasshopper instead of the ant, but instead I'm more interested in what I can pack into these remaining years. The idea of owning anything no longer interests me. I crave neither a house by the sea nor a coffee plantation in the hills. I don't want the responsibility, and I don't want to be tied down. It's a big world out there. If I own a bunch of land and vehicles and buildings, I won't be free to see much of it. My bicycle and my scooter suit me just fine. So instead, I hope to occasionally rent rooms by the sea or in the mountains and store my stuff, what there is of it, in one affordable, accessible place, maybe just a room. The rent I'm paying here for this tiny 2-bedroom house with a room for a garden is less than I paid for a storage locker in Iowa City, Iowa. And that storage locker held box after box of paper, trinkets, garage sale items that never sold, moldy clothing that I never liked anyway. All that stuff I was afraid to let go of when I first began this journey to wander the third world. Well, this is probably the last roundup, the sudden death playoff that happens at the end of a scoreless football game. The end will probably come unexpectedly and without my express permission. I recently wrote a will and a health care directive, which requests that my life not be prolonged if there is little hope of recovery. Wow, I'm turning into the responsible adult I always dreaded becoming. Since borrowing money, taking out mortgages, and managing complicated affairs never brought me a moment's pleasure, I will forego those activities in the time I have remaining. I will wander and converse. Surely it won't be any less interesting than what I was doing much of the time in my world of getting and spending. Wordsworth said, "The world is too much with us late and soon. Getting and spending we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon." Been there, done that. What's important to you? Well, you might not know anymore. You might have once thought you knew, but then you found out it wasn't that either. It's a kind of a trial and error thing. Got to keep trying. Would it be any easier to find this out if you were back where you came from? Probably not. How about if you were hanging around with a bunch of rich people in those places where those with heftier retirements congregate? Definitely not. Nope. This is as good a place as any to discover what your real interests are. And this time is fraught with opportunity to try all sorts of things you never before had the time or freedom to try. So what's going to really get your juices flowing? Well, probably doing something that other people appreciate. Who knows, you might even make money providing such a service. Who knows, you might become popular again. On the other hand, you might become discouraged and irritated by your efforts, resulting in disillusionment and bitterness. Might be safer not to try so hard. Maybe not even try at all. You know, I've seen people who've literally given up. Some of them look pretty happy. Small towns in the Midwest and the South, you see old guys sitting on park benches in front of the courthouse. They don't seem obviously miserable. In cold weather, they lean on their canes indoors, discussing world events, crop prices, what's wrong with young people. Foregoing struggle isn't the same as giving up. It's a decision to be content with what you have. And that, at least according to the Buddha, is the secret to happiness. In my country, people ask you, what do you do in order to know who you are? They especially ask this of men, as certain women still feel comfortable describing how their husbands make a living in order to answer that question. But when you've finally given or thrown away most of your belongings, sold the rest, and moved across the world with a couple of suitcases, chances are there's no answer to that question. At least there's no answer that would impress anyone in a casual conversation. Thoreau wrote about this in Walden. His neighbors were sharply critical of him for not striving to get anywhere, to fight for any cause, to help the unfortunate or weak. He was just taking care of himself. A sin to their way of looking at things. Well, if there were ever a time to take action, it's now. The time for normal scorekeeping has elapsed, and we are now in sudden death overtime. The next team to score wins. This may happen very soon or after a while. But it will happen. The game will end. If you're a baby boomer who's always wanted to try something completely different once you retired, well, then you have a limited amount of time to make that choice. I'm not talking about going on vacation, rather about relocating, moving somewhere far away from your comfort zone in order to experience much more of the world before you die. You are going to die, right? I'm not suggesting you dwell on that fact, but being in denial about it isn't going to get you anywhere either. Unless one is already content where one is, how does one choose and then figure out where to go? Through trial and error. Chances are it'll take time and money, but that'll be time and money well spent in the long run if you find someplace truly exceptional. Wouldn't it be great to find a spot where you'd be glad to spend the rest of your days? More expensive than anything is wandering aimlessly, vaguely discontented and convinced that there's somewhere better just around the next bend in the road. Sure, no place is perfect, but only you can determine what you want. A few years back, I tried internet dating. I described myself as someone who enjoyed travel. I kept meeting women whose idea of travel meant taking cruises. I thought to myself, boy, that would be absolute hell for me. Everything I don't like, distilled and concentrated and packaged. So only your idea of fun will apply to you. That's why you can't easily and readily search it without actually going places and finding what you don't like. After one of my many trips to Nicaragua, I was back in the States playing Scrabble with friends and telling stories about Central America, when a woman we were playing with asked me in all sincerity, "Where do you go to the bathroom down there?" At first I thought she was joking. But then I realized from my descriptions of Nicaragua, it sounded like a place she wouldn't be able to relax and go to the bathroom. Yeah, she wouldn't have liked it there. She also had a miniature poodle like the one Reese Witherspoon had in Legally Blonde. And that poodle wouldn't have liked it any better than she.